My story is not a fairy tale. I think it is something you should know from the beginning. After 8 years working in a place where abortion is our priority, for the first time and when I least expected it, they needed me in the procedure room. There I had to perform an ultrasound on a young woman who interrupted the pregnancy. And believe it or not, I was very happy to be there. But suddenly, I felt a lot of anguish, hearing the beautiful heartbeat of a 13-week-old baby, and in turn the desperate cries of that young man who made such a decision. I was very impressed how in such a short time his little hands and legs were clearly visible. And I got desperate when I saw, when the doctor places the catheter, and the fetus begins to shake desperately, preventing itself from being reached by it. There the doctor begins to suck until a few seconds later, everything is over and only a dark and empty belly remains. I can't explain what I felt at that moment. All I did was run away and cry desperately. You will think that I am just a sensitive person, but so that you can understand, I am going to tell you my story from the beginning. 8 years ago, when I started my 3rd year of psychology, while I was at the volunteer fair, an advisor from Family Planning Control approached me, inviting me to be a volunteer since they needed collaborators, and she explained to me with clear and specific words that the objective of the clinic was to avoid conception, but if it did occur, they solved the problem with a quick and risk-free surgical interruption, alleging that it is a woman's right to want to have it or not. Very proud, I accepted, believing that instead of increasing the interruptions they would decrease. The next day I arrived at the clinic as I had agreed. The entrance was surrounded by protesters, who had a totally different point of view than those in the clinic. They shouted very strong words at me.
Eres una asesina, ¿lo sabías?
But I didn't care. At first my job was to welcome the girls who arrived, and distract them so they wouldn't hear the protesters' words. I did support the clinic. From the moment I left my parents' house I became a party girl. I started going out with Mike, a man from the building 10 years older than me, until the day I got pregnant, and I went to have an intervention. As if that were not enough, I had another fiasco a year after I married Mike. He was an unprincipled man and a womanizer, so I got divorced. But a few weeks later fear and panic invaded me when I found out that I was pregnant again, and not wanting to have any kind of contact with that man, I made my second visit to the planning clinic. I was barely 8 weeks pregnant, so that they treated me with pills, which left me with 8 weeks of a lot of pain, bleeding, cramps and discomfort while my uterus was slowly cleaning out. And after everything happened, the guilt invaded me. The clinic did not have it, only I was to blame. Leaving everything behind, now with 6 months graduated from psychology, my cause became my career. My family supports my career, but they don't agree with what I do. But I love my job with the supposed excuse of helping women in crisis. As time went on, it was suited to specific jobs that just anyone couldn't do, such as rebuilding the fetus to make sure no parts were missing. Usually people who do that for the first time cry inconsolably, but I didn't shed a single tear. Soon after, I married Doug, a wonderful Christian man who loves me dearly. One day I got pregnant despite taking my pills, and although my coworker was ready in case I decided to interrupt it, this time I was very sure I had it. And while my belly was growing, for work reasons I was trying to convince young girls to a break. One day a young woman I knew was about to lose her life. I was very scared. We all ran to help her. Everything was full of plasma because the doctor mistakenly perforated her uterus, and that caused her to hemorrhage. So she had to be taken back to the procedure room, and despite the fact that hours later everything ended for the best, the recovery took much longer. Obviously everything remained a secret. Not even the girl's father, who was the one who brought her, found out what happened. And that same day, when we finished with 38 surgeries in 4 hours, we spent 2 hours celebrating my pregnancy. How ironic. On the way out I met Marilisa, a protester who is also pregnant at the same time as me. She told me that a baby is a great blessing, which I very much agreed with her, but yes, in the right circumstances. Minutes later, she and her friends began the 40 Days for Life prayer marathon outside the clinic, 24/7. My boss in an interview only mentioned that they are extremist fanatics who will not give up until they restrict women's freedom. At that moment I went into labor, and after 22 hours I gave birth to a beautiful baby. My mother was happy to share with her first granddaughter, until I told her that I would be the new director of the clinic. Knowing what it feels like to be a mother and in my new job, I couldn't stop thinking about what I took the lives of my own children, and what I hid from my own mother, so I did something I hadn't dared to do before, and went to get my ultrasound. At that moment I felt so sad and so guilty. 4 years later, before the arrival of a big storm, I had to reschedule the appointments 2 days before instead of suspending them, since if I postponed them it was very risky for the patient, because she had more days of gestation. So I coordinated with all the staff so that everything would be done faster and without setbacks. When the day came, everything went as I expected, sending them home safely. Days later, I won the Family Planning of the Year award, for being the only clinic to reach the goals month after month, and when my boss finishes the speech about the project, I realize that there is a monetary interest and not a healthy one. Since the objective of family planning was to increase the interruptions of pregnancy, and not reduce them as they were proposing, for which I intervened saying that this was not my priority, so my annoyed boss made it very clear to me that the interruptions were the product with the one that they paid me, to be able to afford me the luxuries that I do, and it reminded me that we are abortion providers, and not a non-profit organization like I thought. Very upset, I went home to tell my husband the whole truth, including such painful interventions at 24 weeks of pregnancy, though they stop his heart with chemical substances, resulting in a long labor of a lifeless baby. My husband was stunned at that cruel statement. Days later, something happened that scared the hell out of us, as the main interrupt provider was killed, so my life was put at risk. Outside the clinic, people were praying for the parts of the fetuses that they were carrying in a container to be disposed of.
Señor, te encomendamos las almas de estos cientos de niños.
At the same time that I was going into the procedure room that I showed you at the beginning, I think those prayers worked for me. And although you may not believe it, minutes later I was in the offices of Pro Vida, telling him how horrible it is to see the baby twisting to save his life, a little baby that despite being weeks old, was already perfectly formed, moving comfortably, calm and safe inside the womb of his mother. I told them that I want to resign so that I am no longer complicit in all this, so they supported my decision and will help me find another job, and to protect myself they invite me to go out the back so that no one sees me. When I get home, my husband is happy about my decision, although he already knew that day would come. He was right. That day came. I went to the clinic for the last time to get my belongings and send a fax with my resignation. After having made that decision, I felt peace in my soul, and even more so when my parents found out, since they had been waiting for this moment for years. At night I cried inconsolably. I felt guilty for having lied to more than 22,000 women. When they came to ask me for help, my only advice was to take the lives of their babies. My husband comforts me and tells me not to feel guilty, that God loves me and will forgive me if I ask from my heart. After that day, I joined the pro-life organization to pray outside the clinic as the rate of interventions dropped considerably. When my former boss sees me, she gets angry and calls me a traitor for telling the girls about the dismemberment of the babies and all its details, and congratulates me for winning as an enemy one of the largest and most powerful organizations on the planet. Given that we were sued for having revealed the secrets of the clinic, my husband takes me to a prestigious lawyer, who explains to me how complicated the case is. I had no choice but to confess about my file, since I can't hide anything because everything will come to light. On the day of the trial, my former boss outside the courthouse gave some atrocious statements, and when I entered the courtroom it took only 58 minutes for the judge to realize my innocence. On my way out, unsurprisingly, Cheryl threatens me with revenge. A short time later, the clinic closed its doors forever, and to celebrate we met at the gate for the last time, each one leaving 2 roses that represent each sacrificed child, so that they are never forgotten. I left a letter to my children asking them sorry for not having loved them enough, and for not having fought for them. I tell you that I love you and that one day we will meet in paradise. Because God is merciful and I know that He has heard me and forgiven me. Now I work in the organization, 40 Days for Life. Since then more than 500 pregnancy interruptions have been avoided, and they provide help for those workers in pregnancy interruption clinics. It also lends its facilities as a resource center for gestation. This is the summary of a Christian movie called Unexpected. Click here for more stories like this.